Hi, welcome to the video. My name's Oscar, and today I'm going to be making a video on why video games should be considered as a serious art form. You don't get a second shot at a first impression, so nice to meet y'all. Hope you enjoy. So as I just said, this video is planned to spark discussion on the topic of whether video games should be considered as an art, and also as a discussion on what we can call art. I'm sure while a few people will be indifferent on the subject, most of you will probably have an opinion. Some people will regularly play games and agree that they can be considered art, and some may simply see them as childish time wasters. And this video should hopefully present all sides of the argument, and maybe change the way that some people view this medium of entertainment. I do feel, however, it's important to note that not all video games should be necessarily considered art, just as not all movies or stage shows should be considered art. At times, these things are made for pure entertainment value and do not have artistic meaning. However, this asks another question. What do we consider art, and what do we consider as artistic meaning? This isn't the most simple question to answer, as art can be viewed in many different ways by different people. Contrary to what I just said, perhaps art is just mere entertainment. However, personally, I, and I'm sure many others, don't believe that this is the case. Visual art takes so many forms, including film and stage shows and dance, painting and sculpture, and, as I'm arguing here, video games. To some, art is a response. It is a culmination of ideas and thoughts brought to life for others to experience. Some believe that all art begins as a form of entertainment, but moves beyond that and becomes something that stays with the audience, something that causes them to question their world and think about things that they didn't before. For many, art is a form of expression, a way to convey an opinion and to inspire change. And for me, making art is a method of allowing your audience to experience a narrative which will cause the audience to question and think about everything that I said earlier, a narrative that will stick with the audience for weeks after they first experience it, a narrative that will require extra thought and multiple revisits to truly understand and appreciate it in its entirety. Many articles have been written on the subject of what is considered art. One article I found uses many different responses, ranging from art being a conscious thing that we as humans do, to art being a way of comprehending the world around us. This leaves the main question of the video then. Can video games be called a form of art? In doing research for this topic, I found arguments for both sides. Some examples of way that video games are treated as art, and also some specific games that I myself would call art. And some examples of criticism that they have received from more traditional artists and the like. One thing I found whilst researching this topic was the mention of video games in the First Amendment. I found that video games are seen as a form of expression, and therefore entitled to protection. As the court explains, like protected books, plays, and movies, video games communicate ideas and even social messages. Another thing I found during research is that BAFTA hosts the British Academy Games Awards, which recognises outstanding and award-winning games and parts of games, including awards such as Artistic Achievement, Best Game, Best Narrative, and Best Music. And this leads me on to the first game I'd like to talk about, which won Best Game in 2018. When I first found out about the British Academy Games Awards, I figured it would be useful to play one of the games that won an award, and so I chose What Remains of Edith Finch. As I said earlier, this game won Best Game of 2018, and follows you, playing as Edith Finch, as you walk through your old family home, discovering how each of your relatives met their end, and also discovering more about them through the commentary from Edith. The narrative is fairly simple, but the more interesting parts come from the individual stories and the way that they are presented to the player. This game could probably have been presented as a TV show, or even a stage play. However, the use of gaming as a medium allows it to be so much more impactful. It allows you to truly immerse yourself in the narrative and the world of these characters, as you see everything through their eyes. You experience what they experience, and as each character dies, it hits in a different way, as you have spent time with the character. You've heard the narration and experienced their world and understood their thoughts. And while truly understanding a character can be done with good acting and good writing, this feels like a truly unique experience. As an example of what I mean by all of this, we can look at the story of Lewis Finch. We are told his story by a psychiatrist note that Edith finds in his long-abandoned room. As the note is read out, we are put into the body of Lewis and see through his eyes as he does his mundane job in a fish cannery, cutting off the heads and placing them on a conveyor belt. This monotony is made especially clear when you are the one performing the task, over and over, with the repetitive shunk of the automatic guillotine playing in the background. The psychiatrist goes on to talk about Lewis's overactive imagination, and as this happens, a little window opens up in the corner of the screen. In this window you walk a character around the maze, with more details being added every so often. The narration goes on to talk about how Lewis's imagination grew and started to take over his life. And as this happens, the window grows, soon covering most of the screen. Soon the whole screen is covered in a fantasy that Lewis has created in his mind. And yet the fish are still coming. But by now, performing the work with the fish is automatic for both the player and Lewis, making us feel how Lewis felt as his whole world was taken over by his own made-up one. At the end of his sequence, we start to walk around the cannery, but when looking down, we don't see Lewis's body. Instead, we see a king's robes, as this is how Lewis now sees himself. The walls turn to the walls of a palace, and the narration tells us how the psychiatrist could do nothing at this point, about how Lewis was too far gone. But at this point, it's too late. As you lower your head to be finally crowned king, the screen goes black, and once again you hear the metallic shunk of the automatic guillotine, and you're left with the silence, realizing the grisly truth of what just happened. The game is full of these moments where it allows you to get lost within the wonder of the Finch's world, then cuts it off, leaving you to realize the grim fate of the family. After finishing the game, it stuck with me for a while. The different events and the stories kept cropping up in my head, bringing up thoughts of my family and my own imagination. As someone who is close to their own family, this game struck a chord with me. Such is why I believe it to be a piece of art. However, one criticism of the argument is that games shouldn't need to be an art. They can be entertaining, but their value should stop there. And whilst this is the case for many games, art isn't necessary for life. But at the same time, it's something that many of us live for. So why shouldn't we put artistic messages and impactful experiences through every medium we can? It's stuff that people can remember and learn from, rather than just spectacle. Defining art is a stupid task, but trying to confine whatever art is to a specific medium is a stupider one. Moving on. Similar to how there are many different kinds of art, there are also many different ways to present a narrative. Some, like Edith Finch, put the story center stage. The experience is the story, that's what you pay for. And while Edith Finch does a fantastic job in creating an interesting and memorable narrative, this is not for everyone, as some people may find it lacks gameplay. When using video games as a medium of art, gameplay is important to consider. I believe it's what makes this art form truly unique. Edith Finch's gameplay serves to immerse the player in these stories and this world. It gives us an amazing insight into these characters, but all in all it's very simple. For some this makes it accessible for all people, and for some this is just dull. However, one game that certainly isn't dull is Dark Souls 3. Now, like movies, mainstream games aren't often the most artistic. They often rely on spectacle and action scenes, and it's the smaller films and the more indie studios that often contain artistic viewpoints. However, despite Dark Souls being a large AAA title, I, and I'm sure many others, would call it a piece of art. The way this game brings together visual, sound, story and gameplay is truly memorable, and makes for an experience that stays with the player. The story is complex, and many have done a better job of explaining it than I ever could. But it all revolves around a perpetual cycle of life, death, undeath, and back to life again. And despite all the grand fantasy elements of the whole package, one thing that keeps coming back is just the futility of your whole journey. This quest will be done again and again, and nothing will change. There is a hopelessness in the scenery of this game, rotting towns and castles crumbling to the ground. Once great leaders, now greedy and cowardly madmen. Aside from your own quest, you follow other characters' individual journeys, all equally memorable and complex as your own. Unlike Edith Finch, Dark Souls gameplay takes center stage, so for those who aren't interested in the narrative, they aren't bored. But for those who are, the gameplay gives these players a feeling of attrition to complete their goal, whilst reminding them that their efforts are useless. This game isn't easy, but that adds to the feeling of victory when you make progress. It truly feels as if you have done your task, no matter how futile and no matter how bad the odds. All of these elements stuck with me after I finished playing. But the thing that stuck with me the most was the music. Huge orchestral pieces give fights such a grand scale and pour so much emotion into characters who don't say a word. The music even shows the cyclical nature of the series, with the song in the final fight of the game sharing a song with the final fight from the first game in the series. A final criticism of games as an art form, however, is that games cannot be art because they have objectives. Games cannot be art because you can win, and that if a game has no objective, then it's no longer a game. Now, I disagree. The greatest pieces of artistic film, or the greatest artistic stage play, have an objective. For the characters, their objective differs from piece to piece, but for the viewer, the objective is to learn more about the narrative and this world. In my opinion, art does have an objective: to discover. As an amazing example of this in a game is in a game called Hollow Knight. When this game begins, you're thrown into its world and simply told how to play, and that's it. The rest is up to the player to explore and discover the story of this place and the story of their own character. Unlike Dark Souls, the story is complex, but it's worth uncovering piece by piece. The lack of a solid objective allows the player to explore the world at their own pace for a truly unique experience. Combine this with the gorgeous visuals and a brilliant score, and not only does Hollow Knight refute this criticism, but is also a memorable piece of art in its own right. Finishing this video, it's safe to say that I'm a little biased. I play a fair few games, and I'm interested in the aspects that can stick with me and other players as we go about our daily lives. I'm sure there are more criticisms for games as an art form and more examples of artistic games not included in this video. As I said at the beginning, this video is made to spark discussion. So, if you've watched this, it would be fantastic if you left your opinion in the comments, an argument against video games, or even why a particular game stuck with you. I look forward to any discussion that goes on. Thank you for watching.